Hi, I'm Erica. I use she, her pronouns, and my restorative justice practice is at the intersection of social justice with collegial internal relationships and institutional accountability.
Hi, I'm Eric Lee. I am the Executive Director for Full Circle Restorative Justice. And with that, one of the principles I like to focus on is that restorative justice, if we're going to practice it, it's going to start here with the restorative mindset first.
I'm using the concept of mutual partiality and being non-biased or being mindful of bias with, like you said, first my mindset. I get invested that both parties are going to have a productive outcome, that both parties are going to win. I don't want to be neutral, actually, or impartial. It seems a little bit more distant. I want to get intimate with what's happening and really get into what people's emotions and thoughts are, as well as how they're going to be able to communicate in a way that lands with the other person. So the investment and my buy-in is the first piece for me to be tracking mutual partiality. One example that is coming up for me in my practice lately is with institutional leadership and community stakeholders. And I've been working with this group for about a year and am deeply invested that they come to the table and have some sort of resolution and repair. And what I'm noticing is that the caveat to mutual partiality is that both parties need to show up, which seems a little bit obvious, but there's such an imbalance of participation that it's making it difficult for me to hold mutual partiality and a neutral storyline and not paint like a good guy, bad guy when one party isn't showing up.
So I love this topic. So we do a lot of trainings around restorative practices, and multi-partiality, mutual partiality, we kind of use them interchangeably. And one of the examples that came up for me was one of my first cases at Full Circle was one where it was hate speech in a school. And it was a kid who had tied a noose and put it on a kid of color's car because he thought it was funny. And so you can imagine, as a person of color, that's very triggering. And really being partial to that person and what his needs were doing that, and the circumstances that actually created that as a best source of action for him is something that I had to completely be conscious of the whole time. And as I was able to advocate for him, which multi-partiality brings up for me, the ability for us to advocate for everybody in the circle, regardless of what we believe about their beliefs, helped us create another advocate.
Yeah, I'm learning right now that there's an implicit bias for me around how we say we know things. I'm in spaces with a lot of highly intelligent, very ambitious people in social justice spaces or in high offices in administration. And there's a dominance of intellectual filter as how we say what is valid knowledge. My takeaway is that I need some sort of onboarding for clients to be able to see named all the different ways of knowing, so that one, they can have validation around those, but so they can hear others differently who might not share their same knowledge source. Like if someone has street smarts and they're talking to the president of a college, building that bridge around how the person with street smarts got his knowledge is just as valid as the intellectual path that the president of the college took. And I see that bias a lot. So especially in women and women of color, there's strong training to not listen to our intuition, to not listen to our gut. And it's a a real source of intelligence. There's more neurotransmitters in our gut than there are in our brain. And our heart is 1,000 times stronger than our brain. The electromagnetic field of our heart is 1,000 times stronger than our brain. So that underlying bias in our society is what I want to challenge the industry and challenge myself to make more explicit with folks so we can really go there.
When you show up and you facilitate a circle, and there's so many different backgrounds, and there's so many different perspectives, and there's so many different beliefs, and often it's led to a conflict of sorts. And often in conflicts, what we're doing is we're arguing which truth is valid, or we're arguing who's actually right or who's telling the truth. When my experience has shown me that in that circle, everybody's telling the truth from their perspective. They are telling their truth as they live it, right? And so as we practice multi-partiality or mutual partiality, we're honoring that truth, right? And we're also modeling at the same time that we can accept that truth is different from ours. And as soon as we accept it, we have created a truth that is greater. And we invite them to step into this truth that is greater. And again, my experience is if we are open to that as a facilitator and help guide the discussion that way, then those people who are in conflict break down their own barriers to accept that, yes, this is my truth. And I have been neglecting to see the greater truth of this other individual or this organization or the community. And it opens them up to better repair harms in a way that's good for all.
Yeah, that reminds me of the personal piece of it as well. And something I'd add about this is just how much I need a really strong personal practice, and I need to be keeping tabs on where I am in my own practice. And I actually start to get worried if I don't see that practice happening with my co-facilitator, because there's so much trust and there's so much, it's like the Jedi mind tricks, that we need to be so much in congruence, so coherent, that I would almost recommend to practitioners to like role play or test out the conflict that you're facilitating as if it's with each other, or even if there is an undercurrent of that dynamic anywhere in the organization, run it through, because that has helped me to become more mutually partial and non-biased when I've really felt that growth into larger truth. Like an example is I'm doing personal coaching with my partner, and his criticism of me was that I'm always looking for something to criticize. And my critique of him was the thing I'm criticizing him about, which is a common dynamic that I'm facilitating. Like, oh, you're just too sensitive. Meeting, no, this is really important. And to feel physically that flare up and having to breathe through that and have someone facilitate me and just learn also through that osmosis, it lets me settle into my body and trust myself to go into higher stake situations. And it's peaceful. It's peaceful to hold that both and, that his view is totally valid and appreciated, and not compromise or sacrifice my view to try to pick one.
So the challenge for me is diligence. It's just, and this feeling that you can get around complacency once you begin to practice something and think you've got it. And I tell somebody, it's like, I used to be a pilot, and one of the hardest things for me to do and learn originally, and excuse me for being metaphorical now, but it's like landing. It's like when you land the plane, it's like my problem was I would line up with the runway and think I got it and try to just ride that in. when if you've flown a plane, you know that once you line up with the runway, the wind's going to blow you off 50 feet this way, and you got to get back and line up. And it's a constant doing this to stay on the runway and lined up than it is just holding there. Mm. And so how that relates to this is that, okay, there's times where I think, okay, I got this. I can just hold it. And I've done all the practice, and I can just sit in on a session, and I've practiced with my mates. I'm ready for this, and I'm ready to go. And then I'm triggered, and I'm full of anxiety and anxiousness and perturbed at this person for being a certain way. So it's the constant diligence of watching. You're into somatic practices. What is your body doing? If I feel something bubbling up and sharpness in my heart, or I feel anxiousness in my body welling up, that's a sign that I'm doing something and I'm processing something and I'm triggered by something. And pay attention to that. And it's constant. It's you. I don't know. Maybe you do get there, but I would say you need to stay diligent with yourself and watching your reactions and how that's relating to the circle. And that you don't necessarily get to coast. And I tend to think that I can coast sometimes.
Yeah, practitioners, there's something that's come up in my practice lately as a solopreneur. I have a private practice, so I'm writing contracts with folks. I'm not associated with the criminal legal system or schools embedded in that system. And the bias that I need to disclaim, and I would recommend writing a disclaimer around so it's clear from the get, is the person that pays you doesn't get your bias. And I've had clients directly say, oh, well, we paid you, as if I'm their lawyer to defend their position. And there's a lot of learning in that for the client to understand what our role is to hold mutual partiality. So whatever way you can disclaim that, I would highly recommend doing that.